The most eye-opening was how he had compromised Admiral Church and Admiral Forrestal at that level. People in business were compromised to extort him. Huge extortions. There was a whole team of them, guys doing it, going around the country extorting people. So Skull Murphy and his people had a bunch of little boys there. I think it was 3 or 4 of them. And as he said, they were trolling Hoover and Tollefson. And Hoover bit and Tollefson. And once they had that, they had him. But he says the problem here is going to be the pedophiles are going to use it as a rallying cry, and they want to legalize sex with children. I infiltrated these meetings. I was there. And if you watch and see what they're trying to do in this, it's documented and verified.
With the world being so crazy, I have 2 great gift ideas to help you and your family stay safe. First, the shockwave torch. This tiny tool drops a 260-pound thug in 2 seconds. It packs so much power in such a small package, it's scary. Thank God it's got a safety on it. If you want to stay safe in a dangerous world, I promise the shockwave torch will help. Next, I want to show you the Light Defender Tactical Laser. It's a palm-sized device that drops attackers by shooting off electromagnetic radiation. It is legal in most of the U.S., but it has been banned inside 4 different states, and countries across the world have been banning it left and right. This might have something to do with the fact the military uses these devices in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other hostile zones to drop terrorists in their tracks. The U.S. Navy calls it the best emergency rescuing device, and it's so powerful it will even start fires with no matches or fuel required. Click the links below to learn more about the Shockwave Torch and the Light Defender Tactical Laser Tool. There would be great gifts for your loved ones and family to keep them safe in this crazy world. Welcome to Business Game Changers. I'm Sarah Westall. I have Detective Rothstein, more commonly known as Jimmy Boots, with me again today. For those who do not know who Detective Rothstein is, he is widely considered by those in the know as the most knowledgeable person in the country on human trafficking and how that is used to conduct human intelligence. If you did not see my first show with him, please take the time to watch. That show will give you a basic overview on how child trafficking and prostitution is and has been used as human compromise and intelligence in our country and worldwide. This episode, we will be discussing his informant network, and specifically one of his most effective informants, Skull Murphy. The show has many bombshells that has never been heard outside the shadow government and the mob underground. Some of this will be unbelievable because all of us have been told a false narrative our entire lives. Other elements will even be unbelievable to truth finders, as false narratives have been released into the alternative media as well. Everything Detective Rothstein shares with us today is only based on facts and personal experiences. If he has not had direct experience, he does not theorize or guess on the truth. He just plainly says that he doesn't know. Please note that this episode is broken into 2 parts. I do run ads to support my show. I have to, which could really help you as well. But these are specifically aired before and after the interview to encourage the listeners to please share with as many people as you can and get my shows out there, get his word out there, give people the truth. I will have more segments coming up with Detective Rothstein soon, so look for those as they come out. If you are not receiving notices from YouTube or your podcast network, be sure to sign up for my newsletter at sarahwestall.com to stay informed. Now let's get into my show with Detective Jimmy Boots Rothstein. Hi, Detective Rothstein. Thank you so much for talking to me again.
Well, thank you for having me on.
It is such a pleasure to have you on. You give us such great information, and your background is unbelievable. And you said in the last show that you're not a hero. I think you're an American hero based on
I'm not.
And why do you think that?
Because I just did what I was supposed to do.
Okay, fair enough. I like that answer. In today's world, if you just are a good person, you do what you're supposed to, it turns into being a hero. Okay, let's talk about your informants. Yeah. And you had some really amazing people, one of them being Skull Murphy.
Yes.
Can you talk to me about who he was and why he was such an incredible person?
Well, as I said earlier, he started off, his father had molested him. Then he was put in the Brooklyn Franciscan orphanage where he was molested by two brothers. And that got him into being a victim as he grew up. And then when he got to the point where he was big enough and old enough, he figured he'd get in on the act, which happens to many of these victims. They are originally victims and then they become perpetrators. And he got into it and became the very best. He was the most violent, vicious pedophile I had ever met in my life. And then there came the point where he basically started trusting me and believing in me. And he would eventually or say to the State Select Committee on Crime that I was honest and had integrity. And when he found a cop, and my partner was the same, that's when he realized he could come out and atone for all the things that he had done. And it was heart-wrenching to have to sit there and he would tell you about all the things that he did and how this whole subculture works. But it was probably the most enlightening thing that I had in my career. But the same thing was true, again, like, there were other people. But with Skull, that was the part that got me in to understand what the real world was.
And can you share some of that, like what he explained to you and what was probably the most eye-opening?
The most eye-opening was how he had compromised Admiral Church and Admiral Forrestal at that level. And they both ended up committing suicide over it because Skull and them had set him up with little boys. And when they were shaking him down, they finally realized it and they killed themselves. That was the most that was the one that really alerted me, because at the same time, in actual lifetime, I had a victim come to me and tell me that he had had sex with this admiral who was talking about the secret wars going on between the submarines. A bunch of them had sunk between the Russians and the Americans. And at the time I had a person that was on one of those submarines, and I verified it. But it shows you how this works. So I had it going back many years right to the present. But Skull was the one that alerted me to what that information meant. And then Skull also had the different things where people in business were compromised to extort them. Huge extortions. There was a whole team of them, guys doing it, going around the country extorting people.
In the case of the admirals, what were they pushed against the wall for that would cause them to commit suicide?
Because they were caught. Skull set them up with little boys.
But why? What was the, they pull the trigger at some point because they want to.
Yeah, they go to get money. They go extort them for money.
Was it an extortion for money, or was it an extortion for a war scenario? Okay.
Skull's end of it was extortion for money, but he wasn't the only one. There were other operatives that were using this. This was also a part of our intelligence gathering community. And again, there's another case that brings that to light, which in the original case where I got that, Skull Murphy was the one that identified Quasimodo. He was one of my informants who helped identify Quasimodo.
And who's Quasimodo?
Quasimodo, what had happened was one of the big bosses in the police department called me in his office, and he turned up the music and he held up a piece of paper. We carried on a normal conversation. Dr. Rockefeller looks like Quasimodo, supplies little boys to the United Nations, and I nodded, he nodded. He took the paper, crumbled it up, put it in an ashtray, and burnt it. And when we got done, our conversation kept going on. That man, Quasimodo, I identified with the help of guys like Skull Murphy as Ben Rose. And Ben Rose, when we arrested him, he was arraigned in a hotel room, so there was no record. And he is one of the key informants. This was where the murders happened in 1971, which Skull also knew about, where they killed the little boys. So it was in Ben Rose's apartment, except he wasn't there. He was in the hospital. See, this is Skull Murphy, when it came to the pedophile world, was one of my biggest informants. There were a dozen more, some of them close to him in level of using this, because everybody got compromised.
Now, after a while, because he was an abuser as well.
Yes.
And those were the type of people you took down. Now, because he was an informant, No,
he quit. He quit being an abuser. He had a friend that was old enough, but a young guy. And so it was not a crime. But no, he quit. He ended up helping victims. That's how far he went. You got to remember the mentality of these poor people. Their whole lives. I just had the other day after you left, an hour later, I got a call from a man, about 49 years old, a victim, and this happens constantly. But with Skull too, when he said, honesty and integrity, I finally knew I could make up for all the things I had done. And the last picture, if you read the article on Skull, is he's leading the parade. And he would take the victims of, what was the place in New York, the mentally and physically handicapped kids. He would take them to the park. He'd carry them on the bus. I mean, the man, and John Rubinstein even was taken to meet his mother. And Skull, he has 200 hours of video and audio tapes where after Skull turned, when he would tell the stories of what they did. I mean, I can go on and on of different stories. Undertakers that they compromised that were necrophiliacs, people they would take to the district attorney's office, set them down, and they would play detective. They led the parade in Chicago one year as a lieutenant and captain of the police department. They were that good at it. And Murphy looked like a cop. He was Irish, and he was bad. He was one of the toughest men I ever met. But this is what it's really like. And it was heart-wrenching when he finally broke and started talking. When you hear, it's just like I say, victims of every type, priests that have come here that are victims, calls I've had over the years. When you hear this, and like I said the other night, right after you left, I got a call from a man. I had a 55-year-old man a number of years ago, and he was going to commit suicide, but because I knew what he was talking and what to do, he didn't. So these are the things that society has to understand. You got to understand these victims. That thing right there, My Journey Alone by Father Bill Garding, there is not a soul around here that understands what happened to him. It is so gut-wrenching to hear these victims. I have another one from St. John's, the Father Ekros victims. There's a whole bunch of them. Why can't we have somebody talk to those people? Why am I the only one they call? You want to hear. And it's in the thing I have where it shows her with her little daughter that was taken away. This is real life. But why don't we do anything about it? There's not a soul in this state that would call and say, Jim, can we help you? Why?
So let's get back to Hoover, to Skull Murphy. I want people to understand how he was compromised, because that's at the highest level as well. And people, the information on him, everybody thinks Hoover had all these files, which he did.
Yeah.
But he had a file on Hoover, and Hoover was controlled. Can you explain that?
Yes, it happened, and this is right from Skull's mouth. plus an associate of his. It was at a baseball game in Chicago, and it was at the baseball diamond that has the plants on the wall. They didn't name it. This is what they told me. So Skull Murphy and his people had a bunch of little boys there. I think it was 3 or 4 of them. And as he said, they were trolling Hoover and Tollefson. And Hoover bit and Tollefson. And once they had that, they had him. And the other part of this was, whenever Hoover came to New York, he would meet with Rosenstein and the people. Now, these were the people that were tied in with some of the big operations in New York. This is the exact wordage that I was given on that. So that is why that information was given to me.
Now, were there presidents as well who were compromised in the same way?
I can't say presidents themselves, but people who were running for the presidency. I personally had one of those cases where an informant called me and we went to Uncle Charlie's, and there was a senator who was running for president with a couple of young boys, and me and my partner confronted him. In fact, my partner took a piece of shrimp off his plate and ate it. And the guy called Roy Cohen, who was the big lawyer, you know. And at one point in the conversation, the guy starts going, yes, sir, and he's looking at me and my partner, right? And he hangs up the phone. He says, I want to apologize for being discourteous to you. He says, would you join me for dinner?
He knew how much power and influence you had. Now,
but these are real things exactly the way they happen. You know.
When Skull Murphy compromised Hoover and the admirals, who was he working for?
Who, Hoover?
No, who was Skull Murphy working for?
Oh, he worked for basically Matty the Horse Ianello and some very heavy mafia guys, because they controlled the gay bars, and that Skull worked the gay bars. He also worked for a hotel chain for a while as the head of security. So you can imagine what that was all about. That was a whole nother story.
So why did he go to that much effort for the mob underground?
Why not? You got to make a living. And this is where his people were. He was also the guy that set up the Stonewall riots and what happened there. There were only 3 cops in this world that ever knew the truth about Stonewall. And Skull Murphy is the one that set it up. Are you familiar with the Stonewall?
No, we'll explain that.
The Stonewall was a gay nightclub after-hours joint. And the cops were raiding and shaking them down. They were making these gay people do it. And Skull Murphy ran the place. So Skull came to me and he said, Jim, these people are shaking us down. It was a lieutenant from the 1st Deputy Commissioner's office. And he says, can we stop that? I said, sure. So I got 2 of my bosses, and we were in the 3rd Division at the time, and the other place was in the 1st Division. So we got the cops all set up. They were put in a room with no phones or no nothing. So nobody could rat anybody out. We knew what the story was because the place was what you call was on the pad. They were making regular payoffs to operate. And when Skull gave the word that the payoff had gone down, right, which meant he had made the payoff, we raided the place. Now, that's a double cross, you know, and we knew 3 of us knew what we were doing. You know, the other guys had no clue what had just happened. And when we got done, the gays rioted. Now, I can't say that Skull maybe didn't set this up, but there was one other man there that was one of my informants. Brother Tom Falco. He's in prison right now, where he's been off and on for years. And the rallying cry was, go get 'em, girls. And you want to see, I think the riot was 2-3 nights. It was just hilarious watching this.
Why was it hilarious?
Oh, guys in drag. It was, you know, everything. It was It was the underground that I knew. These people knew me, by the way. And after this was done, we had a meeting. Now, society as a rule doesn't know the difference between gay and pedophile. There is a gay community, doesn't mean everybody assumes the gays are pedophile. That's crap. But there was a meeting with the head of the gay community that I did in an apartment down in the West Village. And I never forget it. And they said, Jim, we thank you for what you did. You know, finally, that we, you know, don't have to be extorted. But he says the problem here is going to be the pedophiles are going to use it as a rallying cry, and they want to legalize sex with children. I infiltrated these meetings. I was there. And if you watch and see what they're trying to do in this, it's documented and verified.
It's for real that they're trying to legalize it.
Yes, but I was there. Again, Skull Murphy had more to do to stop this stuff than any man in this world. He's the one that had the guts to ask me to do something.
Well, let me ask you, what was their reasoning? How were they planning on getting pedophilia legalized?
Well, the way they are now.
How?
You work society, you work the politicians. It's a right. You have a right. Baloney, you got a right to rape children. But if you look in our politically correct, feel-good, do-good society, you can't talk about the bad part. That's not politically correct. And that's what's ruining our society now.
And in which way could they possibly convince others that pedophilia is okay? Are they saying that this is just another sex thing?
Yeah. Oh, you should have been at some of these things when I listened to the stories. It was nothing more but a bunch of degenerates.
And would they say that instead of making criminal, almost like a disease with alcoholics,
That's right.
like you don't, if they do something wrong, then they can't be, go to jail for it, or they can't be, it's the same thing.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
That makes a sense. Now, let's talk about the underworld, and because the underground, there's not just, everybody thinks the money changers are the only ones that do the compromise, but it's not. It's the mob. It's all over.
Yes, because the mob at that time, for instance, the juice joints was controlled by the mob.
Explain the juice joints.
Juice joints were places where they served juice and soda and stuff, and it was where 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old kids hung out and played music and that. But it was nothing more than a place for pedophiles to come and pick up kids. And this was controlled by Anthony Ribito and those people, who I knew, you know. And we'd go to these places. There'd be hundreds of kids there. And nothing was done, you know. And this type of thing.
And this was mob related, not the...
No, this was outright mob. It's just like a lot of the bars that were used where people would go, the gay pedophiles and stuff, and they'd be set up. I had many cases where they'd pick up a kid, and the next thing they knew, they were compromised. People were killed. You know, the atrocities that I saw committed as a part of this Skull Murphy thing. Just here at our German dinner 2 years ago, a lady came up and she says, "Aren't you the detective in New York?" She says, "I was a nurse at St. Vincent's Hospital." I says, "Oh yeah." I says, "That's me." She says, "You know, we used to get these weird things." I says, "Yeah, I'm the detective they used to call it." She says, "Yeah, I know, but I didn't realize it was you." Because when all these things would come in, the atrocities that I can't go public, you know, on the air, but in private I can tell you what the atrocities were that were committed. The hitching post where they would tie guys up and then, you know, and then, it just goes on and on. But those bars were all controlled by different mob figures, and I knew all of them.
Well, let's explain the difference between the compromising that they did, the mob did, versus like the power elite.
Well, it's the same. There's no difference.
Why is there no difference? Did they use the mob in certain circumstances?
Oh, yeah.
So the mob does it, but it's used by various players.
Yeah, but the other people did the same thing.
But did they have their own people? Did they use the mob to do it?
Yeah. No, they used their own people too. Oh gosh, we'd see that all the time.
So they used it too, or they had was it exclusive, or they used whoever they want? I mean, it was
Whoever.
they didn't care. They used the mob
If
sometimes. They used their own
yeah,
people,
yeah,
whatever.
was convenient. Because
Okay.
if you were an agent and you had an informant in the mob, he would set somebody up, right? And you could get the information.
Is this why the mob has been allowed to continue? Because the mob, there would be no reason to allow the mob to continue unless they were using them for their own purposes.
Yeah, well, it's the way it was, yeah. Yeah, you got to have you got to have somebody, and they were there. They had the political influence. It was just the way it was. It's been that way in society forever.
Now, there's we talked before this about there being kind of three areas of society. There's the underground, how things really work, and the people controlling the underground, and then the rest of us that are out in our own little la-la land.
Yeah, and then the shadow government and the world money changers.
But aren't the world money changers the one that control?
They're the overall worldwide. But then normal modern society, I call them sheepalos, because they just follow along with whatever is convenient and feel good, do good. And the underground makes a living off of that.
They take advantage of them.
Yeah, well, you can look at that in our schools everywhere. Oh, we don't want to talk about that. Kids get every year. Like I said, right here in town, I stopped it because I knew what was going on. The high school over here at Albany, the superintendent, when I gave him the victim, he tried his best. And yet she ended up being hooking in South Dakota because nobody did nothing. A girl from Meyer Grove ended up in Las Vegas because nobody did nothing. Why? Why are we letting this happen?
Well, how uninformed are the universities?
Oh, well, they're politically correct. Feel good, do good. They couldn't say nothing if they wanted to because it's not politically correct. You go there and tell the truth. How long are you going to be teaching at a college?
Not long.
No. I've lectured all over this place.
But what do you think about the professors that teach ethics and never dive into this stuff?
Well, that's why, because they can't. Why have we put this political correctness on them? There's an agenda behind that, why it's going on.
Who's behind that agenda?
That is a whole nother group of people who feel we should have an open society. And it goes back to the Saul Alinsky era and all that stuff. And we worked that stuff.
Now, the people that believe we should have an open society, are they naive, or are they doing it purposely to be able to take advantage of people?
Both. Some people are just naive. But yet, when they become victims, like I said, why does a mother say, I was told to put it behind me when her son commits suicide because he was molested by a priest? And he just happened to have been that his father was a kid I grew up with. And the last thing on his deathbed, he called and said, Jim, promise me you won't let my son have died in vain. You know what that does to a person when you get a call like that? There's a lot of them. But how come society hasn't said a word about it? You go and call this, the thing I get is you make all this stuff up. Right?
I've heard that too, yeah.
But guess what? They should go look at the tombstone. Right? How come you don't go look at the tombstone if it's all made up?
Now, we have whistleblowers and informants and all these people now that are coming out, but yet it's still being covered up by mainstream media. Mainstream media is very controlled.
Do you know how it's controlled? I'll give you an example. There was a trial in Norfolk, Virginia with Willie Dunn. It had to do with the Bronfman kidnapping. Edgar Bronfman owned Seagram's Industry. Well, when that was done, there was a reporter by the name of Pinchek that was going to write the story and put out what really happened in the kidnapping. And I bet a mistake dinner, as did my partner, that his story wouldn't come out. It ran, in those days, the New York papers had an evening edition where they'd run a blurb on a big story. What happened was Seagram's Industry called all the media and said, if anybody runs that story, we pull our advertising. The same thing happened right here in Minnesota with a couple TV reporters and the owner. That's how they controlled the media. How can you operate a media when you have no money? Where does the money come from? Advertising. This is, again, firsthand. I got my steak dinner, by the way. I can prove it because I ate it. The story didn't get run. But this is what I'm talking about. You go, I know a reporter for the local paper that wrote a story, and I read it, and he says, see what's in the paper. Wasn't the same thing.
Well, and we're learning that places like CNN only has advertisers now that are pharmaceuticals and big military contractors. And a lot of people have, pulled out and advertising elsewhere. Now, are the military contractors and the pharmaceuticals doing it for a reason?
I don't know. I haven't been in, working that end of it. I don't know. But I'll guarantee you
there's something there, obviously.
Yeah, because I saw in the past, and I mentioned this to you once before, all the reporters and such whose, after writing stories, their careers were over.
And you have a list of that. Can you give us a few examples of reporters that you know that have, how it's such a blackout? It's completely black. People aren't allowed to talk.
Well, I'll give you one, probably the most horrendous one is Kelly O'Mara, when she wrote the story about the St. John's and stuff here. When she got done, she was writing for Insight magazine. It was the end of her career. She wrote a 3-part story for it. She talked to the victims here and stuff. And it was just, she's done. She's working in Vegas now. She's doing something, fixing apartments or cleaning them or something like that. You can go on, Paul Rodriguez, the Coonan boys. It's just a never-ending list of guys who wrote stories. I can show you in my notes where I have copies of stories, one written by Selwyn Rabb for the New York Times about this Minnesota trafficking business, another one about Minneapolis and with McGaughey and them. See, it just goes on. And the local TV guy here that was stopped, cost him his career. He had to go get it out of business. He was well known. His name I won't give you.
And people will point to, well, yeah, but they do cover pedophile rings that have been taken down.
Where?
Well, you'll see some, but
wait. Is there anyone that have ever told the truth?
Now, would you say they were made up?
No, they probably stopped it, but didn't they tell the whole truth? See, no, they don't.
Well, my question is, and it gets to something we were talking about before, they give us popcorn. They give us things that don't have meaning.
Feel good, do good.
Yeah, if it's not really relevant to their operations, then they do it to make it look like they're doing something.
Yes, that's exactly what's happening. They got to be politically correct. Even to tell you can't the truth. There is no truth in political correctness.
Well, and see, and I wanna clarify political correctness because people are fighting over what political correctness is. And political correctness isn't about disrespecting. No. That's an important thing. We don't want to disrespect people. But when you're talking about political correctness, you're talking about something that is interfering with what is right.
Yes, because, there's a lady here who happens to be black, a very expert on this. And I met with her. And I said to her, is this black and white? She said, Jim, absolutely, and you know it, but you can't talk about it. And if you don't talk about black and white, how can you tell the truth? That's what really bothers me. I have dealt with these victims. Mothers have come to me, black mothers, asking me, Jim, what can we do to help our kids? Why can't the society tell them the truth? You think maybe there's a reason for it? Oh, yeah.
And they're hiding behind political correctness.
Yep, because why do we have to put these kids in prison for 60, 70 years? They were used. They've been trained to do this. I watched it. I was there. I've talked to them. I've arrested them. I've convicted them.
Who trains them?
Just, the underground. If that's you get brought up with that and nobody tells you different, what a way to make money.
And they target them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And they
Look
set
at
it
the
up.
drugs. You watch. I stopped the man under the East River Drive and asked him, why are you killing your own people? And he says, I'm the Black Kennedy. He did booze, I do drugs. I talked to him under the East River Drive in New York because I watched it.
And how does the money changers and the people who control us, how do they benefit by having this perpetual cesspool?
Yeah, because there's always the side benefits to be made from it. The human compromise end of it, extorting people. If you have somebody or a business, you can get them to do whatever you want to do. Make them pay. Again, I was there. I saw it. A very big pharmaceutical company was compromised. They paid fortunes. It's just the way it is.
Now, did they compromise people specifically to extort money? Or
to extort the company. Yes.
Or to force certain transactions and all that
part
stuff.
of it I never did find out, but it was to extort the company in whatever fashion they had to. Yep.
And were you involved at all in the human compromise of politicians?
Oh, that was a big part of my work. For instance, the Watergate break-in. How come nobody tells the truth about that? Although I did see lately some mention about the pedophile book. We knew it was there.
Get this vital 30-page ebook from Drs. Ryan Wolfert and Isaac Jones, How to Avoid and Heal the Toxic Brain, and learn proven, natural solutions to overcoming brain diseases and disorders. The first step toward healing and preventing brain disorders is to understand where you're encountering toxins. Identifying and eliminating them is essential to healing and reversing brain diseases. This 30-page ebook will walk you through your kitchen and all the various ways it can hurt you and how to protect yourself. Plus, it will provide you with a list of 8 superfoods to help you become superhuman. And be sure to join us on December 3rd for the start of the free online Superhuman Brain Masterclass. Over 30 experts gather to provide you with proven solutions to heal and upgrade your brain to high performance for life. Click the link below to get immediate access to the 30-page ebook, How to Avoid and Heal the Toxic Brain. And get started on better health today. With the world being so crazy, I have 2 great gift ideas to help you and your family stay safe. First, the Shockwave Torch. This tiny tool drops a 260-pound thug in 2 seconds. It packs so much power in such a small package, it's scary. Thank God it's got a safety on it. If you want to stay safe in a dangerous world, I promise the Shockwave Torch will help. Next, I want to show you the Light Defender Tactical Laser. It's a palm-sized device that drops attackers by shooting off electromagnetic radiation. It is legal in most of the U.S., but it has been banned inside 4 different states, and countries across the world have been banning it left and right. This might have something to do with the fact the military uses these devices in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other hostile zones to drop terrorists in their tracks. The U.S. Navy calls it the best emergency rescuing device, and it's so powerful it will even start fires with no matches or fuel required. Click the links below to learn more about the Shockwave Torch and the Light Defender Tactical Laser tool. There would be great gifts for your loved ones and family to keep them safe in this crazy world. And were you involved at all in the human compromise of politicians?
Oh, that was a big part of my work. For instance, the Watergate break-in. How come nobody tells the truth about that? Although I did see lately some mention about the pedophile book. We knew it was there. The Democratic National Headquarters had a pedophile prostitution operation going. And what they wanted, and don't forget I locked up one of the burglars, Frank Sturgis, the book. See, in these operations in the street, it's called the book. It could be a computer, whatever, where it tells you the customer what his fetish is and how much he spends and all that. It has a double effect. Once you've got that, you can use it against them. And both the Democrats and Republicans were using this. So they could have compromised these people. The Schaffler and others knew a month in advance that the break-in was going to happen.
And they allowed it to occur?
Oh, sure, because Schaffler Schaffler said he was on vacation or something, so he sat up and waited.
And what was their plan with this?
What, to take the information for compromise? Yeah.
They wanted the book.
Yeah, well, it's like when we went and bust. There was one time a guy named Paul Abrams. The informant I got out of the Vatican had set him up. We knew who he was. And the district attorney, when we went for a wiretap, he sent his detectives to bust the joint so we wouldn't get the files. I mean, this is how it works. That's why, what are you going to do? I knew who this guy was.
So was it a joint operation between the Democrats and Republicans to get this book?
No. This was strictly the stuff operating with, Sturgis and his people and G. Gordon Liddy and those guys. These were all part of Op 40 and that shit.
Well, and then they tied it back to Nixon. What was Nixon's real involvement with that?
He had no clue about what they were doing. That whole Nixon thing, and you're going to be hearing more about it. I always wanted to go and tell Richard Nixon the truth, but I figured the man had suffered enough. Why, aggravate him anymore?
Wasn't he trying to clean up the streets?
Yeah, because just before this, he was going to issue an executive order, and me and 4 other guys, FBI and such that I picked, there was going to be a special task force working out of the president's office to go after this stuff. That's one of the, it was very high level, but I was picked to be one of them.
Now, do you think that was one of the reasons why?
Absolutely, but there was other reasons too.
My understanding is there was another operation that went on with the snuff films.
Right here, the original snuff film is what this book was written about, Times Square. We did the original investigation into the first alleged snuff film. Soretsky and those guys, we knew this. Joe Harmon was in charge, Sergeant Joe Harmon. And we found that the original snuff film was disinformation to start with. They wanted to see what kind of response would come from it. And then when they found out it was a very heavy, high response, positive, they actually made snuff films. But the original case was Bobby Soretsky, Joe Harmon was the detective, and we checked it all out. It was one of the most amazing investigations I was ever called in to help on.
What do you mean they were doing it as a test case to see what kind of response? What does that mean?
They wanted to know if the public would respond, and buy something like a snuff film.
They want to know if there was a market for the snuff film.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There was a huge market for it.
Well, but it's in here. It's part of the stuff that we did. We had cops that did this stuff, and how we identified it, and that was the most amazing police work you would ever find in this world.
So now my understanding is that you were put on the task force to take this out, to end the whole snuff film industry at that time.
That was just a small part of it. That was what the State Select Committee on Crime was about. The effects these crimes were having on society was the original mandate.
Okay.
That's what it was.
Now, did you go forward and with your team and actually end some of this, or how did that work?
Well, we tried. Oh yeah, we got some of it with some of the things. First of all, another thing I got to make very clear. My job was to find out what was happening. I had a letter in my file The law said that if there's a felony committed in your crime, you have to take action. There was a letter that said I didn't have to do that. The other thing is you have to report corruption. I didn't have to. Because when I'd make an arrest was because it was so heavy, I couldn't expect another cop to put his neck out there. Then I would make an arrest. But all these things were passed on. The GAF investigation, Operation Together, everything at every point was shut down, including us at the State Select Committee on Crime, and that was how these crimes affect society was the mandate.
Why did they give you as a reason? What was the reason for shutting you down?
National security.
Well, unpack that a little bit. What was so wrong? I mean, you continuing that was actually forward. I mean, I would look at it from the opposite perspective. They gave that as the reason, which is complete BS.
That's to officially shut it down. They invoked national security. The only thing is Jimmy Rothstein didn't believe that. Neither did my partner Matty Rosenthal, and neither did John Rubenstein. But officially, as cops and as working for the governor, it was shut down. And I was retired, and that was it. Okay. That's as simple as it was.
And since you were retired, has there been anything since in your understanding of that kind of investigation going on again?
Yes, the guy that replaced me was a sergeant, and years later, he sent a message to me from Washington. Jim, the same thing happened to me that happened to you. When I tried to take over where you guys were left off, he says, I got shut down.
How long did he run it for?
2 years or 3 years, something.
And then since he retired...
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know.
And it's been flourishing ever since?
Oh, yeah. It's more now than ever.
And how do you know it's more now than ever?
Because I get the calls. Yeah, like I said the other day, you were hardly out of here when I got a call. I got the military victims. One lady, she was a victim, calls me every day. She's willing to go public. I've got a victim of the smiley face killer. She's in hiding. She'll go public. You know, she's tried, but, you know, the stuff that happens to these victims is just horrible. The lady that's a victim of St. John's, she's out in Idaho now. She calls all the time. I'll tell them, why don't anybody call and talk to them? You know, talk to the lady from the military, what happened to her. It's all part of this.
And what do you think it'll take before they will actually do what's right? And
when the mothers make them do it. And I can explain, I used it already, and it works. And
how did you use it? Give us an example.
I did it in St. Cloud here. We started a Mothers Against Trafficking, and it ended up getting stopped when one of the people said that I didn't fit the Minnesota model, and they shut it down because they started seeing how good it worked, because I had nuns on it and mothers, and I called the nuns mothers of the church. And you'd be amazed what happens when you march in on a mayor and you've got your group of women with you, the mothers, and they sit down. And the little girl gets up to tell her how she's a victim, and he says, oh, you're a runaway. Because that's the official thing. They're runaways and homeless. That's why they're not crime statistics. And she used the language of a street girl to explain to the mayor of St. Cloud, Dave Kleiss, that, yes, if I didn't do this, they were going to hurt my mother and my brother. And you call me a runaway?
Well, the FBI stats from, laughable, from 2017 shows, I can't remember the exact number, but about 480,000 missing children. 90% they claim are runaways.
Well, again, what is a runaway? How long is a runaway a runaway? Let's make it even, give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, was this girl in St. Cloud a runaway from zero time? Huh? If she's told they're going to hurt my mother and my brother, and the mother was sitting right there when she made this statement, and she verified it. Again, the girls run away. This same girl was in a safe house up by what is it up here, Brainerd. And at 2:30 in the morning, she ran away. And by 6 o'clock, she was turning tricks in Minneapolis. She ran from Bangor to Minneapolis in 4 hours. She ran that, right?
Yeah, obviously.
Because she was a runaway.
It takes way longer than that.
Okay, so do you think maybe the pimp said, I'm coming to get you? Yes, he did. And this is what I'm saying. Why do they say that? Because it's politically correct.
It's the system's way that's built into the system to be able to do the cover-up.
Yeah, it's not a crime statistic to be a runaway. You know, or homeless, it's so feel good, do good. I mean, just, makes everybody feel so fine. Well, I just get a joke out of it. Talk to these victims. And remember, there's another thing. I had somebody, we have a victim that told us. They are like the grains of sand on a beach. Every girl, every boy story is unique. So if you take one and you go with it, every other thing won't fit. And I learned this very early. You gotta listen to everybody and learn. And you'll find nobody has the same story. Every victim is different.
When you talk to informants and whistleblowers, what would you tell them? Because there's a lot of them. Informants, whistleblowers, that's where we're going to get so much of the information. The victims too, but the informant and whistleblowers you get a ton from. But they're afraid to come forward because of...
That's why they come to me.
Now, what would you tell them as advice, as how we can... Because they want to take this stuff down too. So what would you tell them?
We got to get organized. Get our mothers going. It takes a well-organized, and I've got the whole thing lined out how it works again. Like I say, I know how it works and how you can do it. If you get, and I'll give you an example, you get 5 mothers, and this actually is I was involved in something years ago with this, and the 5 people were, the women had on blue blazers, white ruffled blouses, black slacks, and heavy high-heeled shoes, and they'd march into the place, right? But what they had in those days, we didn't have cell phones yet. And they would have 26,000 people standing by on a telephone pyramid. And in this one case where we walked into a top official in the United States government, and within minutes, 26,000 people were calling. 20 minutes later, we were sitting with the guy. You talk about 26,000 mothers calling. You think they're going to listen to you? When we passed that resolution that went to the governor, I only had 4 mothers call, and you'd be surprised how quick I got a response. Nothing happened, but still, at least I got a response.
So I think we can work together and get something put together with that, because I get a lot of people who are looking for ways to help. So I think we can start to utilize some of this.
And I have it all, how you do it, how you set it up, the rules, everything. And you can do it real quick.
And we can get people volunteering. Let me move back a little bit, but what can an informant do or a whistleblower do? Because I know that,
First,
go ahead.
We have to find a way to protect them. There is right now no place in this state or in the country that I know of that knows how to handle that. We had a system, but you can't do that, where nobody messed with somebody who came to me or to my crew.
You had an unspoken word.
There was a word out in the street. And it's a sad state of affair, but we got to learn how to protect these people. And I've explained it. You know, what you got to have available when the pimps come to get these kids. You know, you got to be able to deal with them. Pimps kill cops. And that means you got to be ready for it.
So now, have you developed some of those plans? So somebody, so they could contact you.
Oh no, me, I don't have.
Well, who can they? What resources are there for?
Nothing.
There's nothing. So that we have to develop it from scratch.
Yes. And law enforcement, again, any cop, any FBI, customs, IRS that does this, their careers are in jeopardy. First, we have to pass that resolution that says if you interfere with anybody, 25 to life in prison. I have the death penalty, but the nuns talked me into making it 25 to life. To me, they should be killed automatically when they interfere.
Put the fear of...
But again, when you work to do something, you must go with the majority. And yes, it's there.
Now, I want to get back to the UN. We know that there's pedophile rings that are using human compromise all the way up to the United Nations.
Well, that's what my informant, remember the original thing? Yes. Supplying kids to the United Nations.
And that is one of the, how do they come out? And there's no method for them to come out. But what are they're doing human compromise. Are they doing it to all the different leaders from different countries? And what are they?
Oh, yeah.
Is that our way or the money changers' way to control the heads of all the different countries?
Well, that isn't hard to figure out. If you got them compromised, you're going to get what you want. And it's the same in Washington. In my findings, 35 to 40% are compromised. What's his name? Robert Merritt, in his estimation, has it at 80%. He was a victim that was in there and was one of Schaffler's informant in the Watergate break-in. That was the level, yes.
And why does he think 80%?
Because he was a victim. He was used and got to the level, the highest levels in our country.
And he sees it.
Yeah.
I've had victims tell me it's a little higher too because they've recognized the people.
Yeah. Oh, well, all you got to do is talk to victims when we were there and they'd know. Or I'd be in Washington. I'd go to Washington. It was amazing. And I mentioned, I think the last time, did you ever hear of Sarah McClendon? She had at the National Press Club, every time I went to Washington, I had to go to the National Press Club, and I'd speak at Sarah's private meetings. She was the Mr. President, the real lady. And she had this little room where she had her meetings. And I would speak there, and you'd be amazed who was at them meetings. But this is why I was at that level. Well,
what could you say in closing? Would you say to informants, whistleblowers, witnesses, which could be victims, people with information on the inside? What would you say to them in closing?
Well, again, they should too work on getting somebody to set up something. If you have to clandestinely reach out, it's hard to say because they can call me, and yet what do I do when I call, Jimmy Rothstein makes all of that up? I have a letter that was written to the Guimau family when Josh Guimau disappeared at St. John's. And Vic Weiss, a deputy sheriff, wrote them and said that Jimmy Rothstein's full of shit and that his isn't true. Now, when cops say that, why? Does that tell you there's something wrong? They don't, I make all this stuff up. Where's Josh Guimau? Isn't he gone? I mean, what part of that is made up?
Now, when the cops that are the ones saying that, I question that they're compromised.
Oh, I don't know if the cops are but again, what if he says something that they're going to go after it? What has happened to his career? I know a guy right now that was in it, and he told me, Jim, got a year to go till I retire. And I know what happened to Gary McGaughey. He says, I want to retire. So I'm playing it, I know what the story is. And he did, because he talked to me. Why does a cop have to do that? Tell me, why don't the mothers, why don't the people march down and demand?
Well, why doesn't our tax money pay for people to do their job?
Well, that's another thing. But what if they do their job? Isn't our legislature passing laws?
That's what I'm saying. All of this, the whole thing. And I'm not just pointing my fingers at police officers, because that's not fair. I'm just saying our tax money is going to support
but when I send this resolution to every level, and not one person ever responds except Michelle Bachmann. Why? Why? Why does this have to happen?
It doesn't. It doesn't.
There's no reason for it. It don't have to happen. The mothers must stand up. And that comes from the very people who know how society works. Harold Laswell, John Rubinstein, and the Policy Science Corporation and them. You know, and we sat there in the apartment overlooking the Hudson River and smoking cigars and drinking brandy, and that's how these things were discussed. But that was the final thing.
This is a little off topic for closing, but I need to ask this question.
Sure.
Whatever happened to the pedophile book from the Watergate break-in?
Don't know. Never found out. Out of all the information I had, I never found out.
They would be interesting.
Yes, yes. But again, it didn't make any difference to me because I knew the other people who knew what was going on. We didn't talk about the informants I had on the female side. They were some of the highest level in the world. You know, I didn't have to have that book. They knew what was in that book because they used it, you know.
They knew. They knew.
Yeah. So, again, that's not so hard to figure out.
So now if somebody wants to understand this, instead of listening to the propaganda and the BS, and even the internet's hard to find the real.
Yeah, but don't believe nothing on the internet.
Well, some of the journalists on the internet are very good.
Yeah, but how do they get their information? They read somebody else's story.
So how can people, what do you suggest for people to start to educate themselves on besides these kind of videos, what can they do to educate themselves on the reality? Do you have a list of books they can read? Do you have anything that is helpful?
Yeah, go out in the real world, start an organization, and they will come to you. When we started that task force in St. Cloud, the second meeting, a girl was sitting right across from me. The police chief of St. Cloud was 14 feet away, and the girl said, you know, there's a 15-year-old, the one I just told you we took in front of the mayor, and she's being forced into this and that. And I says, well, let's tell the chief. No, you can't trust him. It didn't mean that he was involved because they were naive. They would have got the girl killed. So they asked me, she said to me, what can we do? And I have a list of the information. When I got done with her, she had given me 32 pimps and 11 pages of criminal activity. What we did, was something so simple. We got the girl to come to a hotel in St. Cloud, and we had the cops waiting to grab her as a runaway. You know, but we did this. We called the police chief, and he says, well, how do we find her? And I had my girl make a call and set up something, and she came. It was that simple. It doesn't take a genius. And now the biggest thing is they're locking up Johns. Have you ever seen a purer form of pimping in your life? They go and first of all, cops are not allowed to break the law to enforce the law. They advertise as hookers when they're not, which is, you know, I can see that. Then they lock up the John, and they take him to court and convict him and charge him $2,500. Where does that money go? That's pimping. In 1972, me and a district attorney, assistant district attorney, John Patton in New York, went to the New York courts in front of a judge. And what we were doing is arresting hookers, fining them $300 and giving them 30 days to pay. Now tell me, how was the girl going to get the $300? She had to go turn tricks, right? That's pimping.
The system is set up to make it worse.
Yeah, but why can't you do the right thing? It's just as simple, but first of all, somebody's convinced them. Do you know what happens? Well, if you lock up the Johns, there'll be no business for the girls and they'll stop. No, they don't know what happens to a girl that doesn't make money. And one of them is they run the train on them, and again, you get all your experts, they don't even know what that means. And then the second one is, again, that I know physically saw happen. They sew a girl's you-know-what shut with needle and thread. I know that happens. Now tell me, what part of this do they teach in college or to these experts on what happens? Huh?
Yeah, it's horrible.
That girl, Jane Doe 1, I call her. I was going to Iowa to give a lecture, and she called the house and said, I just broke away from my pimp. Tell Jim I'm headed back to St. Cloud. And by the time I got back, her pimp and 2 others had caught her and ran the train on her. And I said, did they use the red hot coat hanger? She says, no, they used knives. And I have 2 witnesses who saw the knife marks, right, of what this girl suffered. Again, why? She couldn't even go to report it.
Well, she had to go to the hospital to get,
Yeah, so?
but they didn't know why. Now, this is really a crude question, but when they sew a woman up, she forced to stay that way, and then they unsew her and she has to go back to work? I mean, what happens?
No, what happened in this case, I was in Midtown when the hookers came to me, Jim, you better go up to the open end. The pimp has got this girl, they got her across the bar holding her down and they're sewing her up. So by the time we got there, the pimp was gone and she was laying there. And we took her and had the sewing ripped out and all that. She had to heal up and that. But this happened more than once. This is the facts of real life. Now, how come nobody talks about that? This happens many times. Again,
the truth hurts, and it's time that we learn the truth so that we can solve it.
Look at the way you respond. Oh, how horrible.
It is horrible.
Yeah, but it's a fact of life. It's the real world.
You have to know it. That's why I asked the question.
Yeah, I know, and that's why I congratulate you for that. Because how many people are scared to ask that question? A lot. I've done many interviews. Oh, Jim, don't talk about that stuff. What are you going to do?
Well, thank you so much again.
And thank you for coming.
Get this vital 30-page ebook from Drs. Ryan Wolfert and Isaac Jones, How to Avoid and Heal the Toxic Brain, and learn proven, natural solutions to overcoming brain diseases and disorders. The first step toward healing and preventing brain disorders is to understand where you're encountering toxins. Identifying and eliminating them is essential to healing and reversing brain diseases. This 30-page ebook will walk you through your kitchen and all the various ways it can hurt you and how to protect yourself. Plus, it will provide you with a list of 8 superfoods to help you become superhuman. And be sure to join us on December 3rd for the start of the free online Superhuman Brain Masterclass. Over 30 experts gather to provide you with proven solutions to heal and upgrade your brain to high performance for life. Click the link below to get immediate access to the 30-page ebook, How to Avoid and Heal the Toxic Brain. And get started on better health today.
In documentation that Jesus Angleton and his people had actually infiltrated the Vatican through Pope Pius XII. They started putting pedophiles into the church at different levels, seminaries, the Vatican and such, used the Vatican under the guise of the secrecy of the confessional and that. They could use that in particular for laundering and moving money. And the president had ordered that I bring 4 men with me, that if I would agree to it, to do a top-level investigation into this activity of human compromise, served them with a subpoena for the State Select Committee on Crime, and before we could get back to the office, national security was invoked. And with all the investigations we did, every investigation other than just the low-life street stuff, was stopped that I worked on.
Welcome to Business Game Changers. I'm Sarah Westall. This episode continues with the series of interviews that I have been doing with Detective Jimmy Boots Rothstein. If you have not seen the other hours of interviews, I really highly recommend you view them as well. Those links will be below in the description to this video. These interviews provide the most detail and high-level intelligence on human compromise, child trafficking, and pedophilia that exists in the media. According to Detective Rothstein and other experts, if we eliminate the plague of human compromise in our country, we would eliminate 85% of the problems our country and world are suffering through today. Because of this reality, we should not and cannot ignore the seriousness of this issue. This episode concludes the 20 hours of time that I spent with Detective Rothstein during the months of November and December in 2018. This segment, we dive into more detail about the Vatican and how specifically it was used to compromise people. We also discuss other important and large cases such as Watergate and the real reason Watergate occurred, the Franklin cover-up, and how it was well known throughout Washington that these boys are being used by politicians for pleasure and for human compromise. This is a two-part interview. The second part, we discuss real solutions for significantly reducing this evil plague and how we can get into a path towards a healthy and safe society. Please look for that very important conclusion to this series. Now let's get into my interview with Detective Jimmy Boots Rothstein.
Jim, thank you so much for joining me again.
Thank you for having me on.
I think what we need to do is go into detail on the structure of the Vatican, how they really compromised it. You did a lot of research on understanding what the structure was and what they really did. Can you give a high-level overview of what they really did, and then we'll dive into different aspects so people can get a better understanding of how they can go into an organization like that and compromise it?
Well, originally it wasn't research, it was an investigation. And how it started was that this is after I had already had a guy compromise Cardinal Spellman in New York. Ed Skull Murphy, one of my big people, had made sure that Spellman wouldn't bother me, because at that time he was one of the most powerful people. But what happened then in 1971, I got an anonymous phone call to go to the federal courthouse in Manhattan. No paper, no pencil, and no camera. So I go there to this room, and I'd been in there many times, and it was a very busy place. I got there was not a person on the floor. And I walked into this room, and there were a stack of papers. And I started going through the papers, and it showed me in documentation that Jesus Angleton and his people had actually infiltrated the Vatican through Pope Pius XII. Now, what it was, not that there was no mention ever made that Pope Pius XII was a pedophile. It just had that they knew he was gay and thereby were able to get him to go along. And what they did, they started putting pedophiles into the church at different levels, seminaries, the Vatican and such, which then set the groundwork for them to infiltrate and with human compromise and stuff like that, use the Vatican under the guise of the secrecy of the confessional and that. They could use that, and in particular, for laundering and moving money. Those were what the basic documents showed when I got there.
Did the documents show who they were? Who were the people?
Well, I told you, Jesus Angleton and the group of people he was working with.
Who was he representing?
He was there with the United States government.
So was it the United States government?
OSS, CIA, and different fragments thereof. It didn't specify exactly, or I don't remember, if it was a special unit or what it was. All I know is that's who it signaled, and it put Jesus Angleton as the head guy.
Now, through your investigation, did you find out who he was directed by? I know the CIA and OS. Were they directed? Was there the money changers? Was there anybody at a higher level that was?
It did not say that. All it said that he was the one that had gotten to Pope Pius XII and such, and thereby were able to do this. And there were a lot of documents there that first of all, remember, I could take no notes, no cameras, so a lot of this was what I had after it, and a lot of it was all the finer workings of this. And I don't remember all that.
But through your investigation later, did you ever get to the head of the snake? Who was really behind it other than Jesus? Was there anybody that was directing him that you got to be?
That was where you run into all of this stuff with these covert ops. They have different units that work different things, and it's just like the Op 40 people in the Kennedy assassination. They are units unto themselves. Who directs them? I've never seen anything say who was actually directing them. Was it outside interest? I always contributed to the shadow government.
And who would you say the shadow government is?
Big business, big money, power brokers, that type of thing.
Is it beyond the President of the United States?
I would say so, yes.
Okay. Is the President aware of any of these activities, or is he just like anybody else where he learns about it through investigations and that's...
Well, I think some presidents were aware of what it was, and some of them, such as Richard Nixon, ended up paying the price for it, because there was one thing I haven't mentioned yet, was at the end of one of our, and I'm not trying to get off the subject
no,
here,
this
but
is
just
good.
to verify it. In 1972, we had convicted 11 of the top 12 pimps in the United States, and it was a joint investigation with the New York Police Department, federal agents of every type, and such. And as a result of that, I was contacted by somebody out of Richard Nixon's office. This was early in '72, before the Watergate break-in. And the president had ordered that I bring 4 men with me, that if I would agree to it, to do a top-level investigation into this activity of human compromise, and basically what it was called was human trafficking. The human compromise was how people were being used after they were compromised. And when Watergate happened, nothing ever happened. And Nixon was destroyed, and to this day, it is my belief, based upon what I know, that that's one of the reasons they got rid of him. Because I also know what Watergate was about. What they were after and the whole thing.
Was that pedophile book?
The pedophile book, because then both the Democrats and Republicans were using it. This way, if they got that information, they would have been able to compromise Democrats and Republicans and have the power, which is how this whole thing works. Most people do not even understand the human compromise part of it, which is why they wanted the Vatican. If you have them and can force, and by extortion, to do things, can you see how beneficial that is? And I can go on for hours and hours describing how it was used in business, how it was used to get money, how it was used to gain power. We actually, in our investigations, they were not research, this is investigating. Big difference between researching and investigating. And that's why I stick with the thing that the only information I went with was the stuff that we could verify.
What is the difference between investigating and researching?
Researching is you just go read a bunch of stuff. When you investigate something, if a man tells you the sidewalk's 20 feet wide, you go measure it and make sure the sidewalk's there and that it's 20 feet wide.
You verify.
You verify everything. And then I had another rule that we believed in very much was, if you found them that they would have been guilty, try to prove them innocent. And if you can't, well, then they're guilty. Because in this work, there's a lot of disinformation out there, and you have to eliminate that. The second part of this you have to be wary of and look at is what people have dreamt up on how things work that aren't true. They don't really happen that way. Like you've never heard of human compromise, human intelligence, till we started pushing it. And then it was still covered up. It's just starting to come out now. And your show has done more to put this out in the open than anything else. But We had this 50 years ago already.
So let's get into more of the details of how they compromised the Vatican organization. What
Yeah.
did they do at the top? They brought in these priests throughout. Now, how did they find pedophile priests to put into place?
Well, they weren't pedophile priests when they came in. They were seminarians and such, which meant they were studying, they were being put in. And the exact words that we had was that they were then to work their way up into the upper echelons of the church, either as bishops or monks, all the different angles, and then they spread out, and that's how there was the words that I saw.
But how did they know they were pedophiles?
Well, you put them in there. When you got a pedophile, they knew who they were.
So they hunted and looked for the pedophiles to
That's not
promote.
hard to find.
Is there a lot of them?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, and it's just a natural thing.
When in your investigative work, what percentage of people, men, women, are pedophiles?
I could, that was hard to say because many of people in society put the gay people as being pedophiles, which is totally wrong. Just because you're gay don't make you a pedophile. There are heterosexuals who are pedophiles, and there was a lot of them. Percentage-wise, I could never come up with a percentage, but we do know that it was used extensively.
If you were to guess, would it be greater or less than 10% of society?
I'd say it's about 10%.
Okay. And they would find the 10% that had leadership, maybe capabilities, and
Yes.
that were pedophiles, and then they'd work to promote them.
Well, certainly, and because you got to look at the way this thing is set up, and we found many instances of it, where our learning institutions had people there just looking for this type of stuff. The people, the different types of students you had, who stuck out in what, and that type of thing. And there were many, many times where I ran across that, where somebody had been in an educational institution, especially colleges and even some high schools.
How did they get people to actively promote this perversion?
Well, I don't think you had to promote it so much. A lot of it was money. People who were above and beyond in power used it because they thought they had a right to. I ran into that many times where that's what it was. They just, felt they could do anything they wanted to do because of who they were. And on the lower level, it self-perpetuated itself by victims. And again, I could cite a dozen cases where a young boy, and I'll use one in particular, Skull Murphy. His father had molested him, and then he was sent to an orphanage, a Catholic orphanage in Brooklyn, where he was molested by the monks, and then he became a perpetrator. And there was nobody better at this than him. Not only was he good at using it to compromise people, but to make money. See, there's a tremendous amount of money to be made, and you can see a completely new end of this is all these settlements that they're paying people now for sexual, picking on women and stuff like that. You look at the payoffs, millions of dollars. Well, like Skull Murphy, and I know somebody that has 200 hours of video and audio tape where Skull tells of the things that he did and how he made money. Huge amounts of money were made by extorting people, plus the power, what they were able to do.
So when it comes to the Vatican, how did they know they were ready to, the network was ready to use? How many years did they take to get?
It didn't take long because there was already an in-ground, setup for it because, and I don't know if priests should be married or not, and if you look like in the book I have there, My Journey Alone, where a priest describes how he was gay and felt he would be safe going into the church to become a priest. I knew the guy. And I interviewed dozens of these people. And they were in there, and then they fell victim to this. And that's why it was there. And that's how I said they had Pope Pius XII using the part that he was already gay. And you got to think back in those days what the mentality was. If you were gay, it was a death knell. And I ran into that. Many powerful, people. Yeah, I was gay, and at that time, if anybody got it, I was compromised.
Now, did they do this all over the world?
Oh yes, definitely. I had Bishop Nilitsa with Father Gruner and Father Kramer. He was with the Russian Orthodox, where during an interview I did with them, where that's what it came down to, when they reported that he was bringing pedophiles into the church, they came after Gruner and Kramer. And I personally sat there and interviewed them face to face when they told me about it. And there were other things like that. For instance, when John Paul I, the Pope, was going to clean this out, he knew what had happened and was going to clean it out. And that was in September of 1978, when Father Bruce Ritter of the Covenant House called me and my partner Matty Rosenthal to be there when Pope John Paul I called Ritter and gave him a special dispensation to clean the pedophiles out of the church and to clean up the Vatican Bank. We were the two detectives that were assigned. And 10 days later, the Pope was dead, because there were people that did not want him doing this. And that, as I explained, how this is all used, And
did you learn who those people were?
What?
That were behind him getting killed?
Yes, I had an informant. The informant, all we knew about him was he was Canadian. He had been in the Vatican studying to be a priest, came home and said, "Papa, you didn't tell me I had to do this to be a priest." And that was be molested. And he went and brought him to Detroit, Michigan, where two federal agents put this kid in the back of a car and drove him to New York to the confessional of Bruce Ritter to give to me and my partner. I spent many, many hours interviewing this guy and working with him. And he took us into things that were above and beyond imagination, and they were all true.
For example?
A very big businessman with one of the big companies. The one night in particular, we were at the Waldorf Astoria in the bar, waiting for this guy to show up. And he was from a big company. And I'm not going to say who it is, but yes, and I knew, verified who he was. And there the guy was. So we know what they were doing, and they were being extorted because this guy was a pedophile. And big biz, just like Skull Murphy said, but this particular kid gave us that information. And on another occasion, there was one of the major pedophile call boy services in New York. And we had gotten him in, or he had gotten into it, and we went to get a wiretap on this to gather all the information. And before we could get the wiretap, the Manhattan District Attorney turned us down, and detectives from the Manhattan District Attorney's office went and raided this guy and took all his files so that we couldn't get him the records. But this came from the kid, so that was just one of the things he did besides what he told me, that it was Ratzinger and Marcinkus that were responsible. I didn't say that they murdered the Pope, but were responsible for the death of Cardinal John Paul I, not Cardinal, Pope John Paul I. That's what they told us.
Now, what other parts of the structure, because you spent a lot of time investigating it, do people need to be aware of?
Well, just at the very lowest levels. You get anybody that's in politics. Now you look, one of the other things that Skull Murphy had, there were two admirals that had committed suicide. United States admirals, Church and Forrestal. Well, he was extorting him. And I had an occasion where a chicken, which is a kid they use to have sex with, told me about a customer he had who was in the military, especially in the Navy. He was in the Navy, and told him about some military things that were going on. And I was able to verify it with the guy. I don't want to say what it is because it would jeopardize some operations, and we verified that this in fact was going on. And I remember as a young sailor was told, loose lips sink ships. And that's exactly what this would have done. It was about a military operation that nobody knew about. So we have it in that. And then in politics, my gosh, we had it from people running for president and everything, where we were physically there and saw it, and interviewed them and talked to them and everything else. So that's why everything was verified. And this young man, the only name we ever knew him by was Dale Smith. And it was not, I never found out his real name. Like I said, he just told me how he got there, how I got him. And then the last I heard, he had died in Brazil a couple of years ago. So that's how my time with him went. And there were many, many things that he gave us.
What are the different ways that they blackmail? You have the little kids, the pedophile. What other ways?
Prostitution with prostitutes. Anything. And I'm just talking about the vice, where they're using things. And what I call it is anytime you violate the rules of society, normal society, you're compromised. If you get caught doing something criminal, they'll lead them into something that's criminal. And once they do it, they're compromised.
And is it more lately that the children pedophilia, because that's still...
Oh, no, this was that way 50 years ago when I started, and it's just as bad as it is now.
But is it almost worse now because prostitution and homosexuality isn't as big of a deal anymore, but pedophilia really is?
Yes, the pedophilia part has taken over. Prostitution, not so much, but it still is. And there's so many things that people don't understand about this stuff. Prostitution too. What kind of victim is it? Is it one where, and again, I'll cite an example. A lieutenant came to me and he needed some information on a very high-level criminal operation. So I took him to meet one of my top people that worked, I had saved her life, and she ended up becoming one of the biggest call girl operators in this country. And we needed this information, so we went to her apartment, and there were 13 girls there getting ready to go to work. Real high-class thing, about 10 o'clock at night, and we're sitting there drinking a can of beer and telling the girls what we needed. Some were getting dressed, some were, Anyhow, when we left, the lieutenant says, would anybody believe that we didn't touch those girls? I says, boss, you don't shit where you eat, because then you have no credibility. The girls will never trust you. In 2 days, we had the information we needed. See, that's how else you can use that. And it's been used. Go back to the Kennedy things. One of the reasons when I locked up Frank Sturgis that they gave for killing Kennedy was that he was messing with the Russian spy, the female. So you see, this has been going on, and it goes back and forth. You can follow it. The break-in, the Watergate break-in and all that. What was it? Again, it gets back to the same thing. You get these files. And there were times through this here where information would come in. You get called down to Washington, and the next thing you know, something happens. It's somebody's compromised. There was Carl Schaffler in Washington, a Washington detective that worked just like we did. He had the same type of information we did. People, one guy in particular, Irving Budlong, committed suicide. Now, can you imagine he shot himself in the head twice, laid down on his veranda overlooking the Potomac, put the gun on his chest and covered it with his hand, and it was a suicide? Well, when Carl called, my partner Matty Rosenthal went down to look at the files. The guy was pimping. You know, a procurer for him was the proper word. But see, this was going on at many levels, and then you had the stuff in Lincoln, Nebraska, what was known as the Franklin cover-up, and Henry Vinson. It just goes on and on. You had all these different operations that I personally was involved in investigating or giving advice to.
Well, let's talk about the Franklin cover-up, because I think it's a good example to use of how they did things. Now, it was a boys' school,
Yep.
correct? And were these boys, were they attached to families?
Oh, sure.
Why were they so easily used if they had families that loved them and cared about them?
Because the families didn't know what was going on. And I was very much involved with that because the original information came from me. And I knew John DeCamp that went with it. And I talked to him. I was involved in the investigation, the whole thing with Larry King, the banker. And you got to remember, it kicked back to Omaha, Nebraska. We had a major investigation in Omaha, which dovetailed into the Johnny Gosch case, into the Jacob Wetterling case, the Martin Allen case, and then the Eaton Patz case in New York, which is a result of, I mentioned in one of your shows, where we had caught them using 3 little boys to compromise 2 people, and during the sex, they killed these 3 boys. And eventually I would identify the guy and serve him with a subpoena. Me and my partner Rosenthal served him with a subpoena for the State Select Committee on Crime, and before we could get back to the office, national security was invoked.
It's incredible. The Wetterling thing in particular, because that they, for me, because it's something I personally saw all the documented proof. And then just a couple months ago, the media is still covering up for them. To me, it's crimes. It's a crime to cover up for others. And they're doing it now. The proof is undeniable and solid. And they still are playing their games.
Well, first of all, as you said, the documentation. I have never once heard anybody in doing this investigation talk about the 20 CIA men who were here that worked on that case. I personally interviewed the head of it.
And what did the head of it say? What did you learn?
He was here and he verified many of the things they found. He also did the Wetterling case, he did the Allen case, the Martin case, and it was an offshoot of, again, of what happened on East 64th Street in New York in 1971 in the apartment that was owned by Ben Rose. And they were making sure that it wouldn't kick back. And this man, even if you read Noreen Gosch's book, testified in Congress about this. And yet you never hear that anybody here, and when ever talked to anybody in the intelligence community, and I personally told them about this. The man, there's a tape on it.
And what's your opinion why they didn't do it?
Well, it's the typical thing. All of these cases, why is none of them solved? Because there's all these other things tied to it. And it's been documented,
Because in the case of the Wetterling, it's solid rock proof. They look incompetent because it's so obvious. And so, but they still are stone straight face lying to the public. How can they justify that?
Easy. It's a cover-up. You remember the new sheriff, or the one they got in there now, said things were done wrong? What he was describing as good cops call it a cover-up. And again, why would they cover something that up? If you dig deeper into this, you can find it. And why, again, the same reason. Why was the CIA guy here? They don't come and investigate something like this out of the clear blue sky. These were specifically picked kidnappings. That they were, you take the Johnny Gosch case and that, and I've done a lot of work on that stuff. Again, not that I looked on a computer to read what it was, I was there. I talked to this CIA guy. In fact, I had quite a few conversations with him. And then what happened was, like they always do, when this was done, he was convicted of being a pedophile, because one of the very first conversations he said, I was picked because I had special qualifications. I says, yeah, you're a pedophile. Oh, he says, you knew that? I says, yeah, I know who you are. But he got convicted, and I spoke to the victim's dad himself down in Virginia to verify it, and now the guy has disappeared. I don't know if he's alive or dead, but he went to jail for a year, and I think it was 3 months, which now made him no good as a witness. He was discredited. And you go to look at Ben Rose, the apartment where these boys were killed. He ended up going to jail when I got done with him. In fact, I was at Forlini's restaurant after I retired, and Ben was sitting there with his lawyer. And I went up to him, and Ben says, yeah, I got to go to jail. I says, no, you don't. He says, yes, I have to. And his lawyer said yes. So he went to jail. He was over a year, too. This way you lose your rights to vote and all that. And his credibility was destroyed. There were many of our people, and in my writings I put down how that's part of the modus operandi. When you get done, these guys are destroyed.
Let's talk about the Franklin cover-up a little bit more, in the sense that there's all these boys. Their ages, most of them were high school age, correct?
Yep. Yeah, that's the typical chicken age.
And they go and they were servicing politicians.
Yeah, yeah.
Was it well known in Washington, D.C., or only small circles that this school is being used?
No, it was well known. And furthermore, you got to remember that investigation still was kept in certain bounds. Because remember, who went for a canoe ride in the middle of this and ended up dead? Bill Colby. Because Colby was going to start to talk. I would, like I said, I was in this at one step even above what John DeCamp had gotten into. And then you got to look at who, this investigation was done. It was done very good, but certain levels weren't touched.
I'm thinking now society has reached a point where people, they've affected enough people where it's penetrated wide and far enough where people are really wanting this to be fixed.
No, I disagree with that. No, I disagree.
Why do you disagree with that?
Because as long as it's politically correct, they'll talk about it and do something. The minute you take it on for what it is and put the facts out there, they run for the hills. And with all the investigations we did, every investigation other than just the low-life street stuff was stopped that I worked on. And eventually I got retired. And this has been going on forever. And when the last time, just before I was retired, I was a consultant to the Policy Science Corporation with Harold Laswell. And I sat there with Laswell and I says, Harold, how could I ever have done this? He says, you need to organize the mothers. Because if the mothers make the men do what they're supposed to and get tired of their kids being molested and everything, then you will be able to do something. And it's true. How many victims' mothers? And right here in my house, I had one. And her son committed suicide because he was molested by a priest. Documented. The father from his deathbed asked me not to forget his son. I knew the father. And the mother says, they told me to put it behind me. How can any mother allow her child to be destroyed, killed? They got to get together and do something. Mothers could stop this dead in their tracks.
One of the most important survival tools of all time, this incredibly lightweight sleeping bags has the power to protect you from the number one killer in a crisis, exposure to elements. This emergency bag also reflects 90% of your body heat back to you thanks to its durable space-age material. This ingenious device helps you keep practically anyone warm and dry in bad weather. Look for the links below. You can also get, as an additional item, this combo pack. It's an ultra-powerful police-grade 18% pepper spray with an ultra-discreet 3 million volt stun gun. I am getting these
For every one of the women in my family, I believe we should all be carrying this for self-defense. And with gun laws becoming stricter than ever, what a great option for women in your family or even men in your family to be safe. With purchase of any other item, you can get this for only $29. So click the links below to find out more information.
Well, number one, you gotta let the people know what's really going on. Let these cops do their job. I can name cops, FBI agents and stuff that did these investigations into the highest levels. Every one was stopped. Immediately, the very first thing is when you find out your son is missing or daughter, whatever it is, you start a diary, number one. Every minute detail has to be put into it because as time goes on, if it is one of these cover-ups, they're going to change stuff. This is the things you have to know, and that's why, like I said, this book, there isn't a family in this country that shouldn't have a book, that little notebook that we made to help you. 5 basic things that are addressed. And if these laws were passed, I will guarantee you it would cut down 85% of this activity.
The scientists at Live Pet are hard at work solving our cancer epidemic. They have the most promising cancer trials going on now with pet clinics around the country that I have ever seen. You can see the promising cancer research and trials going on some of the past shows that I've done. The links are below. While working with C60 and other ingredients, these talented scientists developed a hair growth serum that really works. They sat on it for years. After all, cancer is their focus. But they now realize how much the profits from this product could really help their cancer research. So the C360 hair growth product was launched. C360 hair growth is specifically designed to revive your hair growth by targeting hair follicles and restarting your hair growth cycle. C60, the active ingredient in C360 hair growth, reactivates hair follicles that have stalled due to hereditary hair loss, physical conditions, or environmental factors that may affect follicle production. You will begin to see visible results using C360 hair growth within 3 to 6 weeks. Buy today knowing that your future hair growth will help fund very promising cancer research. See more at the link below. Welcome to Business Game Changers. I'm Sarah Westall. This video is the last in the series I recorded with Detective Jimmy Boots Rothstein during over 20 hours of time I spent at his home in November and December 2018. If you have not seen the other shows with him, please see the link below in the description. I am planning on doing a couple more shows in the future to wrap up a few more topics. This show, however, will focus on solutions to the epidemic of human trafficking. You will hear important details about what a family should do if ever your daughter or son is abducted. Detective Rothstein also lays out a set of laws that should be passed in every city to significantly reduce human trafficking. He also lays out a program for mothers to take back their power and force society to care about our children. He predicts that these activities would reduce human trafficking and human compromise by 85%. As a consequence, this would also significantly decrease most major problems occurring in our society, including war, poverty, drugs, and the vast amount of decisions that only serve a small fraction of our society for the wrong reasons. Because human compromise is keeping our politicians and our leaders from doing what's right. And it's time for us to solve this. And if there's anything you should learn from this episode, is that together we can make a difference and finally solve these problems in our society. The transcripts from these interviews with Detective Rothstein will be made available for free for my Patrons. They will also be made available for a small fee on my website. Now here is my interview with Detective Jimmy Boots Rothstein.
Okay, let's talk about some solutions. You did a booklet with Johnny Gosh's mother, Maureen.
Yes, that's number one.
Let's talk about that because this is about what victims can do and people who are associated with victims. Can you discuss what you've put in this booklet that are highlights?
Yes, and again, like I have it, I got it put together here, and in this thing, it goes right in that the minute you become, your kid is gone, you start a diary, number one. Every minute detail has to be put into it, because as time goes on, if it is one of these cover-ups, they're going to change stuff. And don't blame the cops, because many of the things, if these cops go after it, their careers are over. And in this booklet here, you got to work with the press right away. Make sure the press gets it so they know. But here is the cover sheet for what we did. And it's basically 4 or 5 pages that outlines all the things you have to do to go with it and how to follow up to get an organization going. And these things are very important because nobody knows. And you're going to be, if it was like the Wetterling or the Johnny Gosch case in particular, that was the first big one. And they tried to discredit the mother and everybody instead of going after the facts. And I interviewed the lead guy down there when that kid disappeared. He got a phone call to, how did they say the words, was to stand down on the investigation. And this is how this goes. So you need something that has everything recorded. In the Josh Guimau case here at St. John's, I had the family do that. Document everything.
Now, how quickly do they have to act on this?
Immediately. The very first thing is when you find out your son is missing or daughter, whatever it is, you write down, I heard from so-and-so that my kid was gone this time and everything else. And then every communication, everything you have, you write down.
Now, the media doesn't get involved until it's of interest.
Yep, and
How do you get them involved?
First of all, you call them right away and tell them, hey, my son is missing and this and that, and get the reporters on it. Make sure you have a good working relationship. You also have to remember, they're kept very tight on what they can report and can't report. And I can cite cases of that at the highest levels were stories that were never made public with the biggest papers in the country.
Well, in the case of Wetterling, they're still covering up for it.
Yes. And for instance, there was another kid they tried to kidnap just before Wetterling. You've never heard his name. You've never heard him, and I'm not going to give it now, but yes, I interviewed this kid. I interviewed his mother, and he was riding his bike delivering the newspaper. Now, what was Johnny Gosch doing? He was a newspaper boy. Before the Martin kid was kidnapped, a man told authorities the kid was going to be kidnapped, and still nobody did nothing. He was a newspaper boy. So, these are the things, when you look at these pedophiles, they have fetishes. And in those books they describe what they pay, what their fetish is, and, all that stuff. So this is the things you have to know. And that's why, like I said, this book, there isn't a family in this country that shouldn't have a book, that little notebook that we made to help you.
Now, where can they get a copy of that?
Oh, it's
Can I get a copy of it and put it on the website?
Why, certainly. Right here is a copy.
Well, what I'd like to do is get I have this, but if I could get the digital copy, and then I'll put that up on the website so people can have that.
It should be out there.
Yes, it should be.
Because that is just the basic things that you should do.
Okay, now there are a couple other things that you have as solutions. Let's talk about your government solution.
Well, yes, we had here in this town of St. Martin, right up on the street up here, there were 2 young girls that we had a couple of pimps that moved into this town, and I knew what was going to happen, but plus I had an informant. And when they were ready to grab the girls, I stepped in and stopped it because I couldn't get nobody else to do anything. As a result of that, my city council and us passed resolution, and you can find it on the internet, You put in resolution number 2014-08. And this resolution outlines, and there are five basic things that are addressed. And if these laws were passed, I will guarantee you it would cut down 85% of this activity.
And they can do it at the local city level.
You write a resolution. This resolution is addressed to the governor of the state of Minnesota to pass this law. This resolution was sent to every government official starting at the county level, and it was sent into all the people in the state and to the Cronin investigation where they were working on human trafficking he was out of Texas, and that was done through Doug Caddy, the lawyer from the Watergate burglars, who knew what I was talking about. Only one congressman ever did anything about it, and that was Michelle Bachmann here from Minnesota. She actually called a meeting at the Historical Society in St. Cloud. And you know what? She never ran for office, just like the people in Congress that I went with the confidential report back in the 90s. Out of the 5 people on the committee, only one person ever ran for office again.
After she did that, was it immediately that that same year was it that she stopped running for Congress?
No, I think it was the next year or something.
Well, but it was that next cycle.
Yeah, it was right the next term. She never ran. And Michelle was the only one that ever actively had her people contact me, sit down with me, go over this, and work on it.
Okay, now, what are the 5 things that are specifically illustrated in this?
Well, the first one is the most important. Any person or entity that uses human trafficking, children, child porn, pedophilia, to compromise, extort, or cause another person to do an unwilling act will be guilty of a felony with a mandatory 25 to life prison sentence. And it was the death penalty, but we had a couple of nuns that were, I called the mothers of the church on our committee, and they didn't believe in the death penalty, so we made it 25 to life. But I called for a death penalty on it. That is the big one. Then the next one, any person or entity that buys, sells, trades, or in any way promotes, enables, or profits from human trafficking, pedophilia, human compromise, extortion, or use of children in a criminal manner, same thing, a felony, 25 to life. The use of electronics by these people and other forms of communications to facilitate, promote, or further human trafficking and all this stuff, the same thing, $1 million fine for each occurrence and a 10-year prison sentence. You know, in other words, if you use the computer, if you signal by waving across the street at somebody, you know, you're guilty. You're facilitating this. And, you know, it's so easy to catch them on the computer because it's on there. Anybody can find it. Now, here's the one. Any person, agency, other entity that interferes, threatens, harasses, impedes, or in any way compromises an investigator, investigation, prosecution, or witness in human trafficking and all of that is guilty of a felony with a mandatory 5-year penalty. That's what is the most important one. Let these cops do their job. I can name cops, FBI agents and stuff that did these investigations into the highest levels. Every one was stopped. And it's been going on for 50 years. Then the final one, any enforcement agency, agent, prosecutor, elected government official, or any other authority that fails to act with due haste on all of these things is guilty of a felony. Now that would mean if you vote in a dog catcher and he's elected and he don't do anything, he's guilty of a felony. Can you imagine if all these people were responsible, that are elected officials, what that would do?
Well, if they know about it, they need to do something about it.
Yes, if they're
At least
aware
report
of
it.
And immediately. not to stall it and they have to make sure something is done.
I don't understand why this is so complicated. Well,
It's not.
I think we know why it's complicated because they're protecting themselves. But this is a pretty straightforward.
Very simple, and it's done in layman's language. So if you were to put it legalize it, then you'd have to rewrite it. But this is for the public to understand. And as part of this, I even go into the different definitions, how it works and that. And then we have finally where purpose and need, which describes why we need this.
Okay, talk about why we need this.
Well, number one, you got to let the people know what's really going on. You got to let the people know how this works and define it and define what has to be done. And again, we did have here a little task force for a while till they asked me not to attend anymore because I didn't fit the Minnesota model. And but if you got these mothers together and it's structured, where you have a organized effort. If somebody, like when I sent this to the governor, I didn't get nothing back on it till I had a couple of mothers call.
Well, did you get through the need all the way? And then after that, I want to talk about your mother structure that you came up with, because you defined a whole organization. Do you have any more elements of the need that you think that we need to discuss? Why else do we need this?
It's the whole thing is first of all, we have to let people know what prostitution really is and what pimping is. And it's right in here. You cannot talk about human trafficking without talking about pimps. And you don't hear pimps mentioned. Number one, most of them don't even know what a pimp is and the different grades and levels of it. Procurers are not, that's a different thing. But you have to understand all this. And that's why I explained that in here. And if you don't, like now they got this thing, they're helping. Oh, they got all these programs where they're helping this. If you cannot eliminate the pimp, and I have documented cases right here in this area in the last 3 years, and I have them from 50 years ago. A girl was up at a house in Brainerd, Minnesota, and she was a victim. She had been put in when she was 15 years old. And all of a sudden, she's a runaway. She ran away from there at 2:30 in the morning. At 6 o'clock, she was turning tricks in Minneapolis. She ran all the way from Brainerd to Minneapolis. Can you imagine that? In that period of time? No. The pimp calls and tells them, you better do this. And if you don't, the consequences. They do not factor in the pimps. All they do is if they're runaways, then it's not a crime statistic. They don't say the pimp called and said, here. And they don't know what the pimps do to these girls. I do. I've seen it. I had it right here, and there was nothing we could do.
Prostitutes and these young prostitutes, 15-year-old, they're not what the media and all this, it's not this glorified deal. These people are victims. They're trafficked.
I took a 15-year-old, and to me, from the day you were put into this girl, same girl that ran, we had her in front of the mayor of St. Cloud, and she starts telling him what happened. And he says, oh, you're a runaway. And the girl goes, what do you mean I'm a runaway? The man told me if I didn't do this, they were going to hurt my mother and my little brother. Right? Is that a runaway? No, but long as you call them runaways and homeless, they're not crime statistics. That's the big thing. And this is why you have to do something. When these kids, first of all, you got to understand what they're talking about. And if you want to get out of this, and I've seen it, what they do to girls. It's called running the train on them is one thing. I've seen right here, and I had 2 witnesses that actually saw the physical assault that was committed on this girl, but there was no place to go with it.
Now, some people say that the foundation of society will be rocked. But in your opinion, and this is my opinion, that the foundation of society needs to be rocked so that we can start taking care of this.
Oh, yeah, but like I said, you can, get, take care, find out what the pimps are. How did they get there? That's another thing. I had up here in a little town called Pillager, a group was going to open up a house for these victims and such. And the lady brought up the fact, she says, what are we doing to train, get to the pimps so they don't pimp? I put pimps in jail 65 years. What do you accomplish by putting a man in jail for something 65 years when you don't know any better? And people say, oh, they know they shouldn't pimp. Baloney. That's part of the society,
So they start, they're groomed when they're young kids?
When they're young, yes. I had these pimps. I talked to them, they trusted me. Pimps told me, girls told me. They told me 50 years ago and they told me 3 years ago. So, and the proof is there. Right after we had that task force meeting and I got up and said about what was going on, I identified 32 pimps and 42 victims right here. And that's after the police chief of St. Cloud got up at the meeting and said they had no information that any such activity was going on here. 50 years ago I had that already.
So they're lying. A lot of our authorities are covering
some of them, they don't know.
Okay.
They've been told, oh no, but if you don't know what you're looking at, and now the greatest thing of all is you go on the computer and put on you're a 15-year-old girl and you get the John to call in and you lock up the John and fine him $2,500. Where does the money go? It's just like in 1972 when Assistant District Attorney John Patton and myself went into front of a judge in New York. We would arrest the prostitutes. They'd get fined $300 and given 30 days to pay. So we went in front of the judge and told him he was a pimp. Well, think about it. What were we doing?
You were extorting money from Johns.
Yeah, and that wasn't the Johns. That's what's going on. What? This was the girls.
But now what's going on now? You're doing it to girls back then.
Yeah, and the other day one of the media had it on television. There's all this money missing. Where is it? Again, you can't break the law with false advertising. And there are ways. I agree John should be arrested, but lock him up legally. And what good does do fining him? Give me a break. First you got to understand what this is all about.
The cities like to fine them and then put them back out there so they can fine them again.
No kidding. I mean, give me a break. Mother Nature has never quit in the world. There's a real thing out there.
Okay, let's talk about your structure that you put together with, did you do this with Johnny Gosh's mother too, Maureen Gosh? The structure, the mothers group?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, will you talk about that? What we need to get something like that going? Leaders in different areas of the country, and how would this whole thing
First of all, each community should have what we call the Mothers Against Trafficking for a group. But then there should be 5 leaders. And they should be structured in such a way that when you, as a group, go and you get no response, these 5 mothers go in there. And you set up a thing like a phone bank. Now with cell phones, it'd be easy. You'll hit a button and everybody calls. And I've been there when it was used, and it works. I was in Washington one time, and there were the 5 ladies. They wore blue blazers, white ruffled blouses, black slacks, and wide high-heel shoes. And when we didn't get a response, we were told we'd have to have an appointment. In those days, she got on the phone and called. Within 20 minutes, we had 26,000 people calling. We were in there 20 minutes later.
Now, let me ask you, why did that group disband, or are they still running?
No, this was not for trafficking. This was on another situation.
Okay.
But here, I had them call on the resolution to the governor. I think it was 5 mothers at that time called. And it didn't take long. All of a sudden, they were calling me, and I've got a letter that backs up that I was contacted, But lately, nobody's responding again. But it works, and you set it up in these different groups, and then you'd have it at like a state level, and then a national level, where you'd have these, and then
So the 5 would be at each state level, or the 5 be at
every level.
every level? You'd have 5 leaders. So at the city level, you'd have 5 leaders.
Oh,
at
yeah.
the state level, you'd have 5 leaders, and then at the national level, you have 5, and then they'd all work down the tree.
You could make it 7 if you wanted to, but here. And then, like here is this is the task force set up.
And this, I would like to get the other, just like the government resolution, I would like to get this document too, and I can put this up on my website.
Yeah, and here is the other part of this, is how the Mothers Against Trafficking, as you will notice there is a little hatchet with a T. I call them the hatchet team. When they go there, no is not an option. So
Absolutely.
And it shows you how you organize the phone tree and everything. And this one shows you how the whole thing is set up with the different things. And this isn't, this was done based on past things and that. So you've got all that. But the resolution here, any legislator or county commissioner or anybody, and I took this in front of my county commissioners. And what was very interesting today, and you've interviewed her, Diane Milbauer was there with her people, sitting behind me. And in the front row was a young lady, all by herself, sitting there in front of the county commissioners. And I presented that resolution. And when we got done, the county commissioner said, "Who is that lady?" And I says, "She was there in case somebody challenged my credibility. She was the victim where the pimps ran the train on her here in St. Cloud, and she tried to get out of prostitution. And she was dressed in such a fashion so she could have shown you very easily how she was mutilated."
That would have been a pretty shocking experience for them.
And there happened to be a camera there for some reason. But ask Diane, she was there. And that was the end of it. I never heard from him. Other than the fact that, you should do a formal, no. I made my presentation. But that girl was sitting right there. And this girl, if you want to see all the things, and we couldn't find anybody to work with us.
Well, let me tell you, so people understand how important an organization like this could be. You have Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Mothers Against all these things.
Yeah.
But this is at a whole nother level of how it can change society. Can you talk about if we actually made an 85% dent in this activity, how much would it change our country for the better?
Oh, it'd be tremendous. You would eliminate this human compromise, human intelligence. First of all, how come our scholastic people and education people have not been talking about human compromise and human intelligence? Why haven't we heard about this other than from the street level? First we got to educate. But for the victims, right now, there's a girl missing in Wisconsin, right? Mm-hmm. If we had Mothers Against Trafficking and they started marching in and demanding, what do you think would happen? And holding people accountable. There's a whole structure out there that's been going since 1966 that I know of. It involves the Jeffrey Dahmer case. It involves the people that were involved here and with the Son of Sam case. This is filters. There was a priest, Father Kunz, killed out there. One of the 44s that was used in the Son of Sam case came from Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Is there something I don't understand here?
Well, could this, to give even a clearer picture for people, this could clean up a lot of our corruption, the money being stolen from our government. It could reduce wars that we have. It could, all the negative activities around the world we could see be cut down because of this. This is how serious it is.
Yeah, and the other part of this, who needs this the most? The mothers are the cops. They need this.
To help them do their job.
You got to have mothers that will go to bed. Why are you picking on this cop? Right? I've been with cops that I can't tell you that, right? There's the Eaton Pats case. When it happened, a detective called me. I, by that time, had been shut down already. He says, Jim, don't tell anybody I called you. But your man, Quasimodo, which was Ben Rose, was seen walking with the kids. 2002, another detective called, said the same thing. Don't tell anybody I called you. And he gave me that information. Why? Why do cops have to worry about doing their job? And if they had the mothers, like when we were doing this, when we got shut down, if I would have had 5 mothers to lead the charge and 20,000 mothers in New York screaming, do you think I would have been, and my partners and such, all our careers were over? Do you think that would have happened? Do you think the police commissioner would have had the guts to do it? And who stopped the commissioner? You know, where did it come from?
They're afraid of the people. Mothers don't feel like they have power, but
they're the most powerful thing in the world. But I can't tell you why that is, because that's not politically correct. You know, it gets down to the birds and bees. And let me tell you, this came from the horse's mouth.
But mothers do feel their power has been mentally taken away from them, and they need to stand up and get their power back.
Why does a mother sit here and tell me she's been told to put it behind her? Huh? Why weren't there 50 mothers there to help her? There were 3 mothers there to help her, but that wasn't enough. Why? Just go around these towns here, right here. I'm just speaking now, and check with how many little boys have committed suicide because they're victims.
Because they can't talk about it.
That's right.
Little boys who are raped, and as they grow into older men, it's still shunned in society, and they're ashamed.
Not only that, is why isn't anybody helping these people? Like a 55-year-old man 4 years ago calls me. I got to meet you. I got to talk to you. I never knew who this guy was. I met him. And 5 minutes into the conversation, he says, you know, if you wouldn't have understood what I'm talking about, I was going to commit suicide tonight. He was 55 years old. His brother had been a priest, and he'd bring his friends home and they'd rape him. Right here, there's a guy right now. He just found out that his mother was a hooker, and he don't know how to cope with that. So he's coming to see me, and this goes on and on. What about all the older victims? How many of them are out there? There's a lot of them, and they got nobody to talk to. What about like that priest over there, My Journey Alone? You want to see the priests that have been here and in New York who came to see me, to talk to me. They were victims. And this is what's so sad about this. You know, what about the innocent people? What about the victims? You know, some of these victims may be 15, 16, 17. What about the ones that are 50, 60 years old? It's like the guy that calls me 2 years ago, 6:30 in the morning, to thank me for saving his life. He had been a hustler in New York. For 40 years, he was looking to find me to thank me. You can help people. And I got him out of the business. He ended up in Philadelphia, and that's what he does for a living now, is work this stuff. But you can help people. All you got to know is understand them and talk to them. And don't go trying to tell them what happened. They got to tell you. Every victim, right? I'll stick with what happened around here in one particular family. You sit there and you start talking to these people. Their eyes are empty. And all of a sudden, when they know that you understand what they're talking about, they tell you everything. And it is heart-wrenching how they describe these things from the minutest details on what happened to them. You know, this is all, and then they have this thing now, the greatest law for recovered repressed memory. Yeah, but you can alter that by how you question them. You got to know how to talk to these people. Or they use dolls to say to these young kids, oh, he touched you there. And if you say yes, you get a lollipop. I mean, give me a break. You got to find out the truth. Do you know there's been the investigation out in Oregon There was the one here in Jordan, Minnesota. You know, when people who don't know what they're talking about go in, this can destroy whole communities. And that's why, like I said, we did all this work. The last investigation, we had the Policy Science Corporation. We spent millions. Everything was covered up. All the background, and anybody that wants to check, look up Harold Laswell. Those were the kind of people that were on that committee.
See, I think we got to start having more pride and say this isn't good enough for us.
Yeah, that's right. And back the cops. Get the ones that want to do their job. And if they don't do their job, lock them up.
And support the ones that do. And we have more power than we think.
Yeah, and I've had law enforcement here, both federal and local. Well, not here, not from here. There was 2 cops in Minneapolis, Lieutenant Gary McGaughy and Kenny Tidgewell. Look up their history. I mentioned them to you once before. Go to the police chief of Minneapolis and ask him what happened to Lieutenant Gary McGaughy. That man they had this thing going and they were shut down, totally destroyed.
And the people who destroyed them should be thrown in jail for life.
Yeah, well, why, and we were here with them. I watched it. We sat there with them,
But if society would support them,
yeah,
the mothers would support them, the people would support them, their careers would not be destroyed.
That's right. That's why. And here's another thing. Here in Minnesota at that time, remember I said we were at the meeting, nothing like this is going on? They brought 11 victims from here to New York to testify in front of the State Select Committee on Crime. How come we've never heard of that here? And you want to hear what these kids had to say.
Yeah, we keep it away from people. We can't protect people from the truth. The truth will help, they say, set us free. We need people to learn the truth. It'll be traumatic, but it'll be a lot less traumatic than what the victims are dealing with.
Yeah. And then, like I just explained, what happened to the church. Why doesn't the church, I am Catholic. Somebody mentioned I should have a yarmulke, but I am a Catholic. I was born and raised one. If the Catholics stood up for what was right, this wouldn't happen. And right now, they're throwing the church to the wolves. Why aren't they talking about how this started? They know how it started because they were government documents that I looked at.
The people who are going after them, the authorities, are the ones that, a lot of them are the ones at fault for the whole thing happening in the first place.
That's right, but why aren't we hearing this? And why doesn't the church get up and say? Maybe that when Pope John Paul I did it, it cost him his life. Oh yeah, and again, people say, well, I was there. I got the informant. Why did they have to drive the informant from Detroit, Michigan to New York? Huh?
Why did they have to do that?
Do you think they wanted so I wouldn't get their names? This is the way this worked. Why did I have to get anonymous phone calls? Why I'd be walking the streets in New York 3, 4 o'clock in the morning and some guy had come up to me, no identity, and Jim, you got to look at it. I knew he was an agent from somewhere, some agency. Did I know his name? No. My job at that time was when they found out that we knew nothing about prostitution, trafficking, and such. And I'll give you an example. When the pimps killed an undercover cop by the name of Campisi, our intelligence division gave me a list of pimps. Not one of them on that list was a pimp. They were all Murphy men. And this is what I'm saying. That's when the New York Police Department cut me loose. And my job was to find out what was happening. Now, and let me tell you, in New York, when they send you out to find out what's happening, and they give you all the money you need, and there were times there were 100 cops working with me, detectives. You'd be amazed what you can find out, and you can go anywhere you have to go.
What do you want people to know as we close this up?
As we close this up, organize the mothers and get that resolution. Every town, every borough, whatever you want to call it, should take this to their town board and have it passed. And you know what I found? There were a bunch of towns here that passed it, 5 of them. But what was interesting is the ones that didn't.
What were their reasoning?
Oh, they didn't want to get involved and such, but check into it deeper. There was one town I went to, there was one council member that didn't show up, the only meeting he ever missed. What would that tell you?
He's involved.
Well, God, you know what I'm saying, but that's the most important thing. And get the mothers organized. Get them and have the meetings and do it. And I will tell you one thing. Make sure you're not infiltrated, and you will be. Just like when we had our task force here, one of the first things I said, there's going to be somebody in here to infiltrate, and they were.
What'd you do to get rid of them, and how did you identify them?
They asked me to quit because I was not following the Minnesota model.
They were the infiltrator.
Yeah.
The goofball who messes stuff up is usually the infiltrator.
Yeah, and you know, we were getting things done. But again, get the mothers organized. And when you go on this stuff, no is not an option. You know?
100%. No is not an option.
No. I mean, you go here. We got a new governor coming in. Now, this reaches outside of this, but a lot of states have new governors and stuff. Go to your governor and demand. Go to your federal government. Demand them to act on this.
Thank you so much for everything that you've done, your life's work, and for talking with me today.
Well, thank you for what you're doing, and I want to thank all the cops and FBI, Customs, IRS agents who have worked with me over the years, and you'd be amazed how many people are trying to do the right job.
With the world being so crazy, I have 2 great gift ideas to help you and your family stay safe. First, the Shockwave Torch. This tiny tool drops a 260-pound thug in 2 seconds. It packs so much power in such a small package, it's scary. Thank God it's got a safety on it. If you want to stay safe in a dangerous world, I promise the Shockwave Torch will help. You can also get, as an additional item, this combo pack. It's an ultra-powerful police-grade 18% pepper spray with an ultra-discreet 3 million volt stun gun. I am getting these for every one of the women in my family. I believe we should all be carrying this for self-defense. And with gun laws becoming stricter than ever, what a great option for women in your family or even men in your family to be safe. With purchase of any other item, you can get this for only $29. So click the links below to find out more information.